The man I married asked me to stay home from his mother's birthday party. He said my presence would make people uncomfortable. He said it would be easier for everyone if I just wasn't there. I felt my heart break in that moment. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just said okay. Because I knew something he didn't. Something his whole family didn't know. And when I walked into that party in my beautiful dress, everything changed. If you've ever been underestimated, judged, or told you don't belong, this story is for you. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll understand why silence is sometimes the most powerful weapon. This is the true story of the night I stopped apologizing for existing. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. I need to tell you something before this story makes sense. I need you to understand where I came from, because that's the only way you'll understand why what happened later hurt so much, and why what I did mattered. I grew up in a small apartment in Boston. My mom worked as a nurse during the day and cleaned offices at night. My dad was a delivery driver who sometimes worked 16-hour shifts just to make sure we had enough. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you this because those two people, exhausted as they were, taught me something that no amount of money can ever buy. They taught me my worth. My mom used to say, "Maya, nobody can make you feel small unless you give them permission." My dad would tell me, "Success isn't something people hand you. You build it with your own two hands, one brick at a time." By the time I turned 32, I had built something real. I started small, buying a rundown duplex with money I'd saved working 3 jobs through college. I fixed it up myself, learned plumbing from YouTube videos, painted walls until my arms ached. I rented it out. Then I bought another property. Then another. Within 10 years, I owned 15 properties across Boston. Apartment buildings, commercial spaces, and eventually 3 boutique hotels. My business was worth over $8 million. Not inherited. Not lucky. Built with vision, sacrifice, and relentless work. That's who I was when I met David. It was at a fundraiser for children's literacy. One of those fancy events where everyone's dressed to impress, and the champagne flows like water. I usually felt out of place at these things, but I went because I believed in the cause. David approached me by the dessert table. Tall, kind eyes, and an easy smile that made me relax immediately. We talked for 3 hours that night. He asked about my childhood, my dreams, what books changed my life. He made me laugh until my cheeks hurt. What struck me most was that he never mentioned money. Never dropped his last name like it meant something. Never tried to impress me with what he had. I learned later that his family owned Bennett Pharmaceuticals, one of the biggest companies in New England. But that night, he was just David. And I was just Maya. We fell in love fast. Weekend trips to Cape Cod. Surprise flowers delivered to my office with notes that said, "Thinking of you." Late-night phone calls where we'd talk until the sun came up. He seemed genuinely proud of what I'd built, asking questions about my properties and my business plans with real interest. 6 months in, he said he wanted me to meet his family. I remember getting ready for that first dinner at their estate in Brookline. I must have changed outfits 4 times. I'd negotiated million-dollar deals without my hands shaking, but the thought of meeting his parents made my heart race. I should have known from that first dinner what was coming. His mother, Patricia, greeted me at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You know the kind I mean. The smile that's really an evaluation. She looked me up and down like she was calculating my value and finding me lacking. His father, Richard, barely glanced up from his scotch. His sister, Caroline, asked what I did for work with this tone that suggested she'd already decided the answer wouldn't impress her. When I said I owned investment properties, Caroline said, "Oh, like a real estate agent?" I corrected her politely. "No, I own the properties. Apartment buildings, commercial spaces, hotels." The silence that followed was thick. David squeezed my hand under the table. At the time, I thought it was support. Looking back, I realize it was anxiety. Patricia dominated the conversation, talking about family legacy, about maintaining standards, about our kind of people. She kept using that phrase like it was something to be proud of rather than code for exclusion. I sat there, smiled when appropriate, and took mental notes of every slight, every assumption they made about who I was based on what they saw when they looked at me. When David proposed 8 months later, I said yes because I loved him. The proposal was beautiful, a private dinner on a rooftop overlooking the harbor, with string lights and violins. The city sparkled below us like a promise of our future together. But when he called Patricia to share the news, I watched his face change as he listened to whatever she said. He hung up and told me she was thrilled. The way his smile wavered told me that was a lie. The engagement should have been the happiest time of my life. Instead, it became a lesson in how cruel people can be when they wrap their cruelty in politeness. Patricia had opinions about everything. The venue, the guest list, my dress, even how I wore my hair. She never said anything directly mean. She was too refined for that. Instead, everything was framed as a suggestion or concern. Don't you think a smaller ceremony would be more elegant? Translation: your family is too much for us. Perhaps something more classic for your dress? Translation: don't bring your culture into this. Let's keep the guest list intimate. Translation: we don't want your people mixing with ours. David defended me sometimes, but only in private, never where it actually mattered. He'd tell me his mother meant well, that she was just traditional, that I was being too sensitive. That word, sensitive. It's what people say when they want you to accept disrespect with a smile. And here's the thing that still breaks my heart when I think about it. I started to shrink. I measured my words. I second-guessed myself. I became smaller. That's what happens when you're constantly told you're the problem. Eventually, you start to believe it. We got married on a gray Saturday in October. The ceremony was much smaller than I'd imagined, though Patricia called it intimate and elegant. I called it what it was, controlled. Patricia wore cream to my wedding. If you know, you know. That's a violation. My mother saw it and her lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. My family had more class that day than his family could recognize. During the reception, Patricia gave a speech about how proud she was of David, how he'd always had such good judgment, and how she knew he'd build a beautiful future. She never mentioned me by name. I was David's new bride, as if I didn't exist as my own person. Marriage didn't make things better. If anything, it gave his family more access to me, more opportunities to remind me I didn't belong. Sunday dinners became a weekly ritual of endurance. They'd talk business around me like I wasn't there, like I hadn't built my own empire from nothing. When I tried to contribute to conversations about investments or market trends, Richard would smile in this indulgent way and change the subject. Caroline once patted my hand and said, "It's so sweet that you're interested in these things." I was managing a portfolio worth more than her trust fund, but sure, it was sweet. The worst part wasn't his family, though. The worst part was watching David transform around them. When we were alone, he was the man I fell in love with. Funny, thoughtful, supportive. But around his family, he became someone else. Someone smaller. Someone who let his mother's comments slide. Someone who chose peace over protecting his wife. I'd try to talk to him about it later. "David, your mother was really dismissive today. She's not that bad, Maya. You're being oversensitive." There was that word again. Oversensitive. The weapon people use when they don't want to be held accountable. But I kept building my business because that was something they couldn't take from me. While his family assumed I'd married for money, I was closing deals that would have impressed even Richard if he'd bothered to notice. I bought a historic hotel in downtown Boston, then another in Cambridge. Each acquisition felt like a small victory, a reminder that my worth wasn't determined by their acceptance. I kept my business completely separate from David and his family. They didn't ask, and I didn't tell. Let them think what they wanted. Then came the planning for Patricia's 75th birthday. It started 6 months out because apparently that's how long wealthy people need to plan a party. Caroline was handling everything, which meant I was automatically excluded from real decisions. I offered to help multiple times. Each time, Caroline said they had it handled. The message was clear. This isn't your family. These aren't your people. 3 days before the party, David came home from work with a strange look on his face. We sat on the couch, and he took both my hands. That's when you know something bad is coming, when someone needs to hold your hands to deliver news. He said Patricia was stressed about the party, that she wanted everything perfect, that her friends were very traditional. I waited because I knew there was more. "Maybe it would be better if you sat this one out," he finally said. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. But he kept talking, explaining that Patricia's friends were from a different generation, that there might be tension, that it would be easier for everyone if I didn't come. Easier for everyone. What he meant was easier for him. Easier for his mother. My comfort, my dignity, my place as his wife, none of that factored into everyone. I asked him, "Do you understand what you're asking me to do?" He said he did, but his eyes told me he didn't. He didn't understand that he was choosing his mother's comfort over his wife's dignity. He didn't understand that he was telling me I was an embarrassment. He said it was just one night, that it didn't mean anything, that he'd make it up to me. I sat there looking at this man I'd married and barely recognized him anymore. I could have screamed. I could have cried. I could have thrown things and demanded respect and threatened to leave. But I've learned something about power over the years. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay quiet. So I nodded. I said, "Okay, I understand. I'll make other plans." The relief on his face was almost funny. He actually thought I was being reasonable. He had no idea what was coming. Here's what David didn't know. Here's what none of them knew. 2 weeks earlier, I'd received a call from my property manager about a new acquisition. I'd just purchased the Harrington Hotel, a historic luxury venue that had been renovated into one of the most exclusive event spaces in Boston. My manager wanted to confirm details about an upcoming booking. A large private party. A family celebration. Substantial deposit already paid. She told me the name of the client who'd booked it. Caroline Bennett. They were throwing Patricia's birthday party at my hotel. In my ballroom. Using my staff. Eating food from my kitchen. And not one of them knew it. David had been part of venue discussions. He'd seen pictures. He'd approved the menu. Never once did he ask who owned the place. Why would he? People like his family don't think about things like ownership. They book venues and hire staff, and assume the real power belongs to people who look like them. I spent the next 3 days in a state of calm that probably should have worried me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The day of Patricia's party arrived. I got dressed like I was going somewhere important, because I was. I put on one of my favorite dresses, deep emerald green, elegant and powerful. I did my hair and makeup carefully, not for them, but for myself. I wanted to remember this moment exactly as it was. David came into the bedroom as I was finishing. He looked handsome in his tuxedo. I won't lie about that. "You look beautiful," he said. "Where's your business dinner?" "Downtown," I replied, keeping my voice light. "One of my properties." He kissed me goodbye, clearly relieved I wasn't making things difficult. He left thinking he'd handled the situation smoothly. Men like David think avoiding conflict is the same as solving problems. It's not. I drove to the Harrington Hotel an hour before the party started. My staff greeted me with respect and professionalism. They know me well. "I'll be observing tonight's event from my office," I told my manager, Marcus. "I want to make sure everything goes perfectly for our guests." Marcus nodded without question. He trusts my judgment. I went up to my private office on the 3rd floor. It has floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the main ballroom. I could see everything. Watching them arrive was something else. Patricia walked in like she owned the place. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard followed, nodding approvingly at the decor. Caroline flitted around checking details. And David, my husband, moved through my space, drinking wine from my cellar, served by my staff, completely oblivious. Patricia kept telling people how exclusive the venue was, how difficult it was to book, how only the finest families could secure it for private events. Only the finest families. As if quality was measured in bloodlines instead of character. David looked comfortable in a way he never quite was when I attended family events. He laughed with Caroline, kissed Patricia's cheek, blended seamlessly into their world. The world he'd specifically excluded me from. That's when I knew this marriage was over. Not because of what he'd done, but because of how easy it had been for him to do it. How natural it felt for him to be there without me. The party continued for about an hour. Speeches were made. Champagne flowed. Patricia thanked everyone for coming, for celebrating her life, for being part of her journey. She thanked David specifically, her wonderful son, and how proud she was of the man he'd become. She didn't mention me. Of course not. In her mind, I was probably at home where I belonged. That's when I sent Marcus a message. It's time. I watched from above as he approached their table, professional and polite. He introduced himself as the hotel's general manager and asked if everything was satisfactory. Patricia smiled graciously. It's absolutely perfect. Truly exquisite. Is the owner here tonight? I'd love to compliment them personally on such a magnificent property. Marcus didn't smile. Mrs. Bennett is in her office. I'm sure she'd be happy to receive your compliments. I saw the confusion ripple across their faces. David's last name is Bennett. Patricia is Mrs. Bennett. But so am I. The older Mrs. Bennett asked, There's another Bennett family member here? Marcus simply said, the property owner. Would you like me to ask if she's available? I didn't wait for an answer. I walked out of my office, down the curved staircase, and into that ballroom like I owned it. Because I did. Every head turned. The music seemed to soften. I wasn't loud or dramatic. I was just there, present in a space they'd tried to erase me from. I walked straight to their table with my head high and a calm smile on my face. David's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion. Recognition. Disbelief. Horror. Understanding. Caroline's mouth fell open. Richard looked like he was trying to solve an impossible puzzle. But Patricia's face was the one I'll remember forever. Shock, embarrassment, anger, and maybe, just maybe, the first hint of respect I'd ever seen from her. I stopped at their table and smiled warmly. "Happy birthday, Patricia," I said. "I hope you're enjoying the venue." When my staff told me we had a Bennett family event tonight, I wanted to make sure everything was absolutely perfect. I let that sink in for a moment. Let them process what I'd just said. "The party is on the house, of course. Family discount." Then I turned to David. "I thought I told you I had a business dinner tonight. This is my business." The silence was complete. You could have heard a breath in that ballroom. All their friends, all those traditional society people, watching as the daughter-in-law they'd dismissed revealed herself to be the woman who owned the building they were standing in. The woman they told to stay home. The woman they deemed not good enough. I owned their celebration. Literally. I didn't stay long. I didn't need to. I'd made my point. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said to the table. "My staff will take excellent care of you. I have other properties to check on." Professional to the end. I walked out with the same quiet confidence I'd walked in with, leaving them to sit with what had just happened. David came home 4 hours later. I was already in bed, reading a book like it was any other night. I heard him come in, heard him pause in the hallway. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom for a long moment before speaking. When he finally did, it all came tumbling out. Apologies. Excuses. Explanations. He didn't know I owned the hotel. He should have asked. He never meant to hurt me. His mother didn't realize. If he'd known, things would have been different. I let him talk until he ran out of words. When he finally stopped, I carefully marked my page and set down my book. I looked at him, really looked at him. "David," I said quietly, "you told me not to come to your mother's birthday party because you were embarrassed of me. Not because you didn't know I owned the venue. The ownership doesn't change what you did. It just makes it more obvious how little you actually know about who I am." He tried to argue. I stopped him. "You chose their comfort over my dignity. You asked me to make myself smaller so they could feel bigger. That's not a partnership. That's not a marriage. That's not love. Maya, please. I've spent 2 years shrinking myself for your family, measuring my words, second-guessing everything I say and do, trying to be acceptable to people who decided from day one that I wasn't good enough. And you let them. You stood by and let them treat me like I was less than." Tears were streaming down my face now, but my voice was steady. "I built something real, David. I came from nothing and created something substantial. Something that matters. And your family couldn't see it because they were too busy looking at what I wasn't. And you, the man who promised to love and protect me, you couldn't see it either. Or worse, you saw it and decided it wasn't worth defending." He sat down on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. "What do you want me to do? I want you to think about why it took me owning that hotel for you to feel ashamed. I want you to think about why you needed proof of my worth before you could see how wrong this was. But most of all, I want you to think about what kind of man asks his wife to stay home from a family event because she might embarrass him." We sat in silence for a while. Finally, David spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I love you, Maya. I know you do," I said. "But love isn't enough when it doesn't come with respect. And you don't respect me, David. Maybe you did once, but somewhere along the way, your family's opinion became more important than your wife's dignity." The next morning, David moved into the guest room. We told ourselves it was temporary, that we needed space to think, that maybe we could work through this. But we both knew the truth. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. His family never apologized. Patricia called once, saying she hoped we could move past this unpleasantness. She actually used those words. As if my exclusion was just an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than a deliberate act of disrespect. I didn't return her call. Caroline sent a text saying she'd always known I was holding back, and that she wished I'd been more open about my success. As if the problem was my secrecy rather than their assumption. I didn't respond. Richard said nothing at all, which was somehow the most honest response of them all. David tried for a few weeks. He suggested counseling. He promised things would be different. He swore he'd stand up to his family. But every promise felt hollow because I'd heard versions of them before, and nothing had changed. 2 months after Patricia's party, I asked David for a divorce. He cried. He begged. He promised he'd do better. But I was done. I was tired of fighting to be seen, to be valued, to be respected in my own marriage. I don't hate you, David, I told him on the day he moved out. But I can't be married to someone who makes me feel like I'm too much and not enough at the same time. I can't keep shrinking myself to fit into your family's idea of acceptable. And I won't teach any future daughters I might have that love means accepting disrespect with a smile. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Clean, simple, no drama. I kept what was mine. He kept what was his. We divided the few things we'd bought together and went our separate ways. It's been a year now since that night at the Harrington Hotel. A year since I walked into that ballroom and reclaimed my power. A year since I stopped shrinking. People ask me if I regret how I handled it. They ask if I should have been more direct, if I should have confronted David earlier, if I should have tried harder to make the marriage work. My answer is always the same, no. Because here's what I learned through all of this. And I need you to really hear this if you've ever been made to feel like you're not enough. Your value isn't determined by who accepts you into their circle. Your worth isn't measured by who deems you good enough. And your success doesn't need validation from people who've already decided you're less than. I didn't show up at that party to embarrass David's family. I didn't do it for revenge or to prove a point. I showed up because that space was mine, and I was done pretending to be smaller than I am to make other people comfortable. For 2 years, I'd let them make me doubt myself. I'd let their dismissive comments and subtle put-downs chip away at my confidence. I'd started to see myself through their eyes instead of my own. But that night, standing in my hotel, in my ballroom, employing my staff, I remembered who I was. I remembered the girl whose parents worked themselves to exhaustion to give her opportunities. I remembered the young woman who fixed plumbing and painted walls and built something from nothing. I remembered Maya before David, before the Bennetts, before I started measuring my worth by their acceptance. That woman was powerful. That woman was unstoppable. That woman didn't need anyone's permission to take up space. The best part, my business has grown since the divorce. I opened 2 more hotels, expanded into commercial real estate in Providence, and started a mentorship program for women from working-class backgrounds who want to break into real estate investment. I get emails every week from women who heard my story. Women who've been made to feel small. Women who've been told they don't belong. Women who've shrunk themselves to fit into someone else's idea of acceptable. They tell me my story gave them courage. Courage to leave relationships where they're not valued. Courage to stop apologizing for their success. Courage to take up space without permission. And you know what? That means more to me than any property I've ever owned. I'm not going to lie and say the divorce didn't hurt. It did. I loved David. Maybe I still do, in a way. But I love myself more. And I've learned that's not selfish. That's survival. I ran into Patricia a few months ago at another charity event. She saw me and hesitated, clearly debating whether to approach. Finally, she did. "Maya," she said stiffly. "You're looking well." "Thank you, Patricia. So are you." There was an awkward pause. Then she said something that surprised me. "Caroline told me you started a mentorship program." That's quite admirable. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close. But it was acknowledgement. And sometimes that's all you get. "Thank you," I said. "It's important to me to help women who remind me of who I used to be." She nodded, uncomfortable, and excused herself. As I watched her walk away, I realized I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel hurt. I just felt free. Free from needing her approval. Free from trying to prove myself to people who were never going to see me clearly. Free from making myself smaller. So let me tell you what I wish someone had told me 2 years ago, what I wish I'd known before I met David, before I let his family's opinions matter more than my own truth. You are enough. Exactly as you are. Your background doesn't make you less than. Your success doesn't make you too much. And anyone who tries to convince you otherwise is showing you who they are, not who you are. The best response to being underestimated isn't anger. It's achievement. The best response to being excluded isn't bitterness. It's building something so undeniable they can't ignore it even when they try. But here's the most important part. You don't build that success for them. You build it for yourself. You build it because you deserve it. You build it because you're capable. You build it because it's yours. I didn't need to own that hotel to have worth. I had worth long before I bought a single property. But owning it, standing in it, claiming it as mine, that reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That reminded me of my power. These days, I wake up in a home I own, I go to work in buildings I own, and I make decisions that only I have to answer for. I date occasionally, but I'm in no rush. I'm learning to enjoy my own company, to take up space without apology, to be fully myself without shrinking. And you know what? It feels incredible. So if you're reading this and you've ever been told you're not good enough, if you've ever been excluded from spaces you belonged in, if you've ever made yourself smaller to make someone else comfortable, I want you to know something. Stop shrinking. Stop apologizing. Stop trying to earn acceptance from people who've already decided you're less than. Build something undeniable, not to prove them wrong, but to remind yourself who you've always been. A force, a builder, someone who belongs anywhere she chooses to stand. That's my story. That's my truth. And I'm done being quiet about it. Thank you for listening.